What happens to cops after they get fired, getting caught sleeping with prostitutes while they're on the clock, or refusing to respond to calls when their other officers are at risk? Well, they get fired and then later hired at other smaller departments. At least those were the findings of an expose done by the Washington Post, which was excellent in terms of investigative reporting, and found that cops who were fired from the New Orleans Police Department were later hired at smaller departments nearby. So here's what they found. In the past decade, the department has fired or otherwise pushed out at least 248 officers. Of those forced out, 53 have been hired by other police departments. Mind you that out of those 53, there have been cases of police officers who then got fired at other departments and then rehired at other departments and then fired again and then hired again. It's insane. So I'm gonna give you the details, and they did profile a couple of the officers. I don't have time to get into every single one that they profiled, but the officer that stood out the most to me was Kerry Dykes. And when I tell you his story, it is just unbelievable. So former New Orleans Police Superintendent Ronald Serpas said that sheriffs and other chiefs often justify rehiring officers by dismissing their problems as political. As a result, troubled officers remain in policing, he said. Another finding through this report is that smaller departments usually don't, or say they don't have the resources to train young, new police officers, and that it's actually cheaper to just rehire people who have already been trained. So that kind of goes to the point that keeps coming up over and over again when police brutality stories make headlines. There are issues with training, and in some cases, police officers who have been fired because of the fact that they haven't been following guidelines, or in some cases have broken laws, get rehired because the smaller departments are like, oh, he was trained at some point long ago.
Yeah, and when they say political, they don't mean someone was fervently Republican or Democrat. And sure, there could be a couple of cases of office politics, but largely they mean this guy beat the living crap out of someone, and I guess he got caught and it got in the media, so it got all political and they had to let him go. But we're happy to have him beat the living crap out of people at our department.
This is insane. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Kerry Dykes, the officer that I mentioned earlier. So he had been fired by the department in New Orleans because he was caught up in a sting operation. They had to conduct a sting operation on one of their own police officers because they had reason to suspect that he was using his time as a cop to sleep with prostitutes. So Kerry Dykes was suspended 3 times for violating department policies, including failing to follow instructions and filing incomplete reports. Now, those were some of the initial issues that the department experienced with him. In July of 2010, a woman told police officials that an officer was paying women for sex. She told internal affairs investigators that the officer spent some of his nightly shifts cruising the streets, quote, picking up women, working girls. She complained that she had sex with him but was not paid. Okay, so the department decided to investigate this to their credit. And through their investigation, they actually found that there were motel records that showed that Dykes rented a room, a $45 room, checking in with his driver's license at 2:50 a.m. in the middle of his patrol shift. So that was evidence that essentially reinforced what the woman came forward with. Then from the sting operation, they found that yes, indeed, he was using that time to sleep with prostitutes, and that on the sting's 5th night, investigators watched Dykes park his squad car at the London Lodge at 3:35 a.m. Almost an hour later, a 911 call came in from nearby. 2 men had wrecked a Chevy Tahoe and fled on foot, armed with assault rifles. So he was called immediately to come help. He ignored that call. Then gunfire broke out. He ignored that call as well. Things got so bad that some of the police officers were actually concerned that maybe something happened to him. Like, let's go check in. Why isn't he responding to these calls? They go to his car and they find that he's asleep.
So there's a host of issues here. The most minor one was one we haven't even discussed here, but I'm saying minor in terms of the treatment that it's gotten. But in reality, it's perhaps the most important one. is that he was sued for assaulting people several times for brutality. One time he assaulted a pregnant woman. They did a small payout for her. And another time he was, quote, he brutally beat a man with nightsticks. And so that these days has become a minor problem. I mean, he beats the living crap out of people, and as a cop, that we've empowered him with a gun and a badge, etc. But it's easier to catch him on the other stuff, like because for cops they're like, no, that was the pregnant woman seemed a little unruly. That's why I kicked her ass, right? But it's harder to make excuses when you're sleeping in your patrol car and another cop takes a picture of it while you're supposed to be helping other cops who are getting shot at. And by the way, one of the reasons that this guy is kicked out, whereas others are protected, is you're endangering fellow cops' lives, and that they have no tolerance for. Exactly,
and keep in mind, this is someone who is using his time getting paid by taxpayer money to break the law. Right? Look, I think prostitution should be legal, but keep in mind, he is sleeping with prostitutes, which is a crime, right? He is clearly breaking the law, and you would think, all right, well, he's gotten fired, and that's it. His police career is over. But no, it wasn't over. He actually got hired by a different department. So months after he was fired, Dykes applied for a police job at Delgado Community College in New Orleans, and on August 5th of 2011, the community college offered him a job with its police force, hiring him for about $12,000 less than he said he made in New Orleans. So he got hired at a community college.
So the local police departments, the sheriff departments, hire people for two reasons. One, Anna told you about in length, because it's easier because they're already certified. The other is because they're willing to take a pay cut since they can't get hired anywhere else. So like, oh, you're gonna work for cheap because you used to beat the crap out of people and sleep with prostitutes, and by the way, not even pay them, not have the decency to pay them,
right?
While you're supposed to be working, protecting the community. Like, but with him, like, I'm kind of glad he wasn't on the beat. I'd rather probably have him sleeping in his car than protecting the community. But come on, when people are getting shot at, especially your fellow officers, get up already, Jesus Christ.
So he gets hired at this community college, and then he actually applies for a second policing job. In July of 2016, while employed at Delgado, Dykes secured a second job at the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office as a reserve duty sheriff. He continues to work at both departments. So that is essentially what happens. And in Louisiana, they have a certification program, right? So if you want to be a cop, you have to have certain credentials, you have to be certified to be a cop. If you do anything wrong, if you do anything illegal, you are supposed to be decertified. That way you don't get hired at other departments. The Washington Post found that in the last decade, not a single cop has been decertified.
Yeah, of course, because they protect their own, and right or wrong. And so, last thing on this is, police unions are an excellent case for and against unions. Man, that union protects its own more than anything I have ever seen. If you're in that union, you're made for life. You know how many times this guy, Dykes, violated police department rules? 17 times, and they still couldn't fire him. And they had to go and they had to do a sting and they had to catch him with the motel with the hookers and sleeping, and all they had to do all this stuff to finally fire him. So unions do protect you. On the other hand, sometimes they protect these cops at the expense of everyone else. So upside and downside, but they are strong, and when you have a strong union, it does protect the workers. If you become a member of the Young Turks, you'll be saying,
you know, I'm like a smart person.
So do it right now, tytnetwork.com/join. Get the whole Young Turks show every day.